This presentation discusses the results of my food tracking survey. I will also describe my meetings with nutrition advisors at my school. Food tracking has been a required lesson in Beaverton School District up until this year. This I learned when I spoke with the Dean of Students at Southridge High School to learn her opinion on the topic as well as comprise a plan for gathering data. When I spoke with her, she told me how she had previously come from Aloha High School and this was her first year at Southridge. Her role was to redo the health curriculum so it was less triggering and biased. She did not appreciate the food tracking that was in the curriculum previously and expressed her frustrations of how some teachers in the district were not complying with the updated guidelines that stated food tracking was no longer to be taught. My goal was to understand if this decision was in the best interest of the students by conducting a survey of students who have experienced food tracking. I came to the dean with a plan of putting a survey out to the entire school to gather a large and accurate sample size. Unfortunately, this proved to be an irresponsible idea as the survey in itself could be triggering as my survey questioned students on a possible history of disordered eating and eating disorders. I was then introduced to a health teacher at Southridge who had similar views to the dean. We decided that I could survey 4 health classes, all of which were made up of upperclassmen, because they had just gone through a nutrition unit that provided students with helpful resources if they felt uncomfortable. My first question I asked students was if they had experienced an eating disorder or disordered eating. Disordered eating I classified as restrictive eating, binging or overeating, compensation after eating, and any irregular or inflexible eating patterns. 42.6% of students responded that they had not experienced disordered eating or an eating disorder. 57.4% of students responded that they had experienced a disordered eating or an eating disorder. This is significant because it shows just how high disordered eating and eating disorder rates are, even if this is just a small sample size. Secondly, I asked students who had experienced disordered eating or an eating disorder if their problems with food started with information that they learned in health class or information in general that was told to them by a teacher. 72.9% of people responded no. This means that 3/4 of students who experienced any disordered habits around food gained them from outside sources and not in health class. 27.1% of students responded that their disordered habits around food were provoked by information learned at school. This is significant because it shows that some information being taught at Southridge, whether this is the same information that's triggering every student or not, is causing students to develop disordered eating or eating disorders. The final question I asked students was how their relationship with food was affected by the food tracking lesson and the recording that they were assigned to do in class. Examples I gave of being negatively affected by food tracking was that after the assignment, they found themselves restricting food, binging on food, or having anxiety around food. Examples I gave of being positively affected after food tracking assignments was having a better understanding of food and food portions, understanding nutrition labels, being able to eat more whole foods, and eating amounts that better match their body's needs. 50% of the students said that their food habits and overall relationship with food was not affected at all by their food tracking experience. 35.3% of people responded that they were negatively affected by food tracking. 14.7% of people said that they were positively impacted by tracking their food. The most significant piece of information I learned from this question was that more people had a negative experience with food tracking than a positive experience. I also think it is important to note that half of the people who participated in any food tracking did not have a positive or negative result. I now want to share some anecdotes students shared with me on the form. I received no anecdotes about the positive experience they had, so all of these anecdotes refer to a negative experience. The first one is, quote, "We had to track everything we ate for a week using a fitness tracker. This made me feel really self-conscious about what I ate, especially since I am an athlete and eat more than my classmates. Because I had to track all my food, I would end up eating smaller portion sizes so it wouldn't look like I overate. This caused a bunch of problems in the future, like restrictive eating, overeating, and being self-conscious about how I looked. The second quote is, I was in my first week of recovery when we had to track our calories and health. It promoted a horrible message that health is dictated by controlling your eating habits. The third quote I chose to include is, foods were labeled as belly foods, and the health teacher indicated that these foods would go straight to your belly as fat and weren't nutritious because of this. Most of these foods were just carbohydrates like pasta, potatoes, bread. The final quote is, I remember looking at it, the food diary, each day and feeling horrible for the amount of food I was eating. I felt fat and thought I shouldn't be eating this much. I especially hated the amount of carbs I saw I would write down. I lied about what I ate on the last days and started restricting even more. I went from maybe 2.5 to 3 meals and 2 snacks a day to 1.5 to 2 meals a day and 0 snacks. I still struggle with restriction, but I now struggle with binging as well. I was diagnosed with anorexia earlier this year. While this survey does not confirm that teaching food tracking does or does not cause eating disorders, I believe that the data I gathered is important when trying to understand if dismissing food tracking at Southridge High School positively or negatively impacts students. The data shows that more people were negatively impacted by food tracking than positively impacted. I also believe that anecdotes are very powerful and show an important message that only the students can share. Thank you for listening.